Good evening. Welcome to the October 11th, 2022 meeting of the Dover-Sherborn Regional School Committee. My name is Judy Miller, and I call this meeting to order at 6:31 p.m. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. The first item on our agenda is community comments. So before I give the preamble for community comments, I just want to see if there's anyone here who would like to make community comments.
There's no one on Zoom.
Okay, hearing none, then we can move to our first item. Our first agenda item, which is actually going to be, we're going a little bit out of order. We're going to hear a report from Alex and Margaret, and I can't read what your last names are.
Alex Martinovich and Margaret Bowles.
Thank you.
Yep.
And who you may have read about if you read.
Very impressive.
Incredible. And I'm going to invite you guys to come and present to us.
Yeah, come on up. So I had asked the superintendent for permission to have these two fine students come forward to talk about a project that they did in their advanced placement computer science class last year. And last spring, when I was told by their former teacher, Mrs. Papafatopoulos, I thought, wow, this is pretty amazing. Well, come to find out, they continued working on it and fine-tuning it over the summer on their own personal time. And they have now created this fantastic app, which I will have them describe, but it really truly is a testament to their abilities as students, their ability to take learning and to transform it into an authentic process. I think it hits home our portrait of a graduate competencies, things that we're looking forward to, and these are they're outstanding students anyways, but this just shows sort of going above and beyond and intellectual curiosity, which really is what is driving them at this point. And I have to say, the philanthropic process that they also have engaged in is also admirable as well. So without further ado, Alexander Martinovich, who is a senior, and Margaret Bowles, who is a junior.
So I guess to start, in our AP Computer Science class, we had to do a project that was using code in a way that's useful in our everyday lives. We pretty quickly decided that we'd work together and to code an app to score outdoor track meets. The idea came out of a series of miscalculations and not knowing what the score was in different meets, and knowing what the score is during a meet is obviously important because then you know which athletes you need to sub in, how close the margin of point differential is, so if you can win, and how hard you need to try, I guess, to do so. So our original app just added up the scores for different events, for all of the running events. So you start with the 400-meter hurdles, I think, and then for field events, you start with, I think, the long jump. And then you add all those together, and then you get your end scores. The highest score wins. So it was really a matter of storing all those variables and getting that all together. The original idea was that we'd use the app for our outdoor coach, just as an aid in helping them score meets just during the outdoor season. But we turned that into the College Board at the end of the school year, and we thought, okay, that's done. But then we thought we could probably expand on the project, and over the summer we created an indoor track scoring app and a cross-country scoring app. The indoor track app is very similar to the outdoor track app because it's scored basically the same way. They have just have different events. And then the cross-country app is a little bit different because in cross-country it's like golf, so the lowest score wins, and placement's a little bit different because there's obviously only one race instead of 16 or something.
Right, yeah. So we worked together on that over the summer. We met a couple times each week. Mm-hmm. And just sent back and forth code until we had 3 apps that functioned as well as we could make them. And then we decided to not only just give those to our own coaches in the town, but to try to distribute it to the TBL, and our larger goal is across the MIAA, just to use as a tool for all coaches to be able to score meets, because it's very helpful. It makes scoring a lot easier, and it makes meets run a lot more smoother.
Yeah. We decided eventually that once we figured out that we had 3 apps that worked and they worked consistently and we knew why they worked, So once we'd gotten those out, we thought that we can charge coaches for customizing the apps for different teams. So team logos, team colors, team names, team photos, any other things that the coaches want. We could also make tweaks to the code to make it more user-friendly for whatever organization that wants to use it. And then we decided to use the proceeds from the customization of the app. So $15 an app, 3 apps. Schools can get 1 app or 2 apps or 3 apps. And then that all goes towards the Girls Club for Science in Boston, which is a nonprofit that gives free coding experience to girls and gender divergent youth. I think the statistics we ended on is 20% of people in STEM are women, and less than 4% of people in STEM are women from marginalized backgrounds, like women of color. And so we thought that the Girls Club for Science in Boston was a more local way to help I guess, close the gender gap in STEM. That's pretty much it, but anything else? If you have any questions or anything? Alex, anything to add?
No?
I have a question. So have you started to market it to the TVL teams?
Right, yeah. So we met with Mr. Smith and Miss Sullivan, and Miss Sullivan this year is in charge of cross country for the TVL. So she sent out, I believe, an email and a tweet to all the TVL coaches. So we have that, and then we were also in contact with a man named Coach H in the MSTCA, and he emailed the head of the MSTCA and asked her to also distribute the information to everyone.
Excellent. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
That I have to say, I cannot tell you how proud, I don't want to speak for everyone, but how proud we are of, it's quite an accomplishment, and it's really spectacular.
Thank you very much for lucky good DS.
I have a question, and it might not be in the spirit of sharing the app, but is this the kind of thing that you could potentially patent? I mean, does that happen with apps?
I think we might have thought about that. I don't know if we've ever talked about it very much, but I'm not sure. We'd have to look at what other applications have been made in the area of track meet scoring. I don't think there are any that we've come across. So that's definitely something to consider. It's a good point. Thank you.
I think currently we're just trying to get it out to other coaches and have them use it as something that can help them. So it's not yet on the level that we look for a patent.
Right. No, I know the spirit of sharing it. I appreciate it.
But you're like cash money.
Well, no, but I mean, it's so amazing from so many standpoints.
And it's good to have your name on a patent. I know, there were people in college with me who did some computer, and they had their names just on the patent, and that was, when they were getting jobs, it's like, well, look, I've already gotten a patent.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice.
Yeah. Look good on your college ad.
I think it's pretty safe to say that this will be one of probably many accomplishments that these two young women will be engaged in throughout their life. So what I told them when I met with them is they truly can do whatever they want to do and be whatever they want to be. They have the drive and the motivation and like I said, the intellectual curiosity. They're both very established runners as well. They both love their sport. They both have raced in New York, representing national track organizations, and Margaret just recently broke the school record for the cross-country course.
Congratulations.
Awesome.
That's
Wow.
Let me
excellent.
ask so before, how did they score it? Did you all just have paper and pencil? Were they literally just writing them
We
down?
have fantastic photos of our boys team trying to score track meets and misdoing it. People do it on clipboards or backs of envelopes, phone calculator. Sometimes we forget the long jump results, and we think we're losing to Norton
Track meets
specifically.
are specifically difficult
Yeah.
because there's so many moving parts.
Yeah.
And so for each event, you have to score the top 3 places. So first place is 5 points, second is third, and third place is 1 point. So that's a lot of math coaches are doing, especially because you can have the 400 hurdles running at the same time as shot put, and long jump.
So there's a lot of divided
There's
attention.
a lot of divided attention.
And there are so many student athletes in
Exactly. I
cross
think it's
country and track.
A third of the school does that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
great. Yeah, but
And for coaches that are trying to coach athletes and time
And,
people and find all the results and everything,
Yeah.
it's just hard to keep track of the score as you're doing all the time.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I'm glad that you found a solution to, just an ineffective process. That's
Yeah.
really impressive.
Yeah.
And I think it's just so exciting. I remember a few years ago, we just started the AP computer
Yeah,
science course, and
yeah.
you're an example of if they build it if we build it, they will come. And not only did you come, but you got a home run grand slam out of the park. So thank you for showing others what's possible. Thank you for helping the track team and local teams. And thank you for giving back to the community and making science and computer science available to other youth in the area.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very
Good job.
impressive. Thank you.
Well done.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Welcome
you
to
so
stay,
much.
but you probably have other things to do.
Yes.
Two very busy students.
That's why I asked.
Okay.
Do you want to stay on high school, or do you want to,
Whatever,
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Margaret.
whatever you think. What do you think?
since we're on the topic of high school, would you like to go now?
Yeah, either way, I just wanted,
Yeah.
I didn't
No,
want them
that's
to have
great.
to stay, but I'm happy to. So, obviously, in addition to what a wonderful accomplishment by these two young women, as you can see in my report, we got a lot of great things happening. We are, back at it. The classes are really working well. The new teachers we've hired through both student feedback and my own personal observations are doing incredibly well, really making connections. I witnessed a math lesson today that really had some real neat creativity to it, so I was really pleased with that. Our drama program is up and running again. We have Radium Girls coming in early November. Our athletic teams are doing incredibly well once again, and another source of pride for us. And then on top of that, just a couple of other things. We have brand new Mac laptops in our Mac lab now instead of desktops. So we're once again in thinking about portability and thinking about apps, and so we have those in each of our labs that are being used all throughout the day by a number of different teachers. We have plans in the works to also redesign the two computer labs to make them more modern and functional for group and collaborative work, and that's underway as well, thanks to our business administrator, Don Fattore, and Sean McGee in facilities, and Nick Grout, and we're talking about the purchasing of almost something like you might see in a Google studio. You might see it in a small computer tech place where something that we can transform furniture and use it in many different ways depending upon what is needed at the time. DSEF a few years ago was incredibly generous and gave us funding for a couple really fantastic computer boards that enable us to, through touchscreen options, through multiple connections, all wireless, we're able to really project a lot of neat things. So kids are getting those experiences. I think I also have to give credit to our people for, being creative with space. Our building is pretty tight, and we are using up every space, and we currently have two different spaces. It once was a drama closet and another one that was a foods closet. Well, those are now offices, and those have been transformed through, people's creativity and work and our custodians and making things work into those spaces, and Sean McGee transferring, light systems and different things, because we're now using those spaces as office space and functional space within our building. Every ounce of our building is being used in some shape or form. And it's great, but it does point to the fact that down the road we're going to have to really look at our space issues, whether that's mobile, whether that's adding on, getting creative. And I have, in talking to David Lawrence, I know that he's getting to that point too, where it's getting tight. That being said, when you go into these spaces, and I think there's been some discussion about a potential day at each of the schools for school committee members who are interested, and we would love to show you around at some of the creative things we've done. And they are creative and they are working, but it does point to the fact that any further growth or development, and we're going to probably have to look at getting even more creative in addition to the space we have already. And just finally, a shout out to our department chairs who recently ran a professional development session at our last early release day, looking at best practices. I thought they did a fantastic job. It was a great opportunity for them to showcase their skill set as department chairs. They are highly respected, and as a result, I think that the day was very, very successful, and it usually is because they're able to provide the buy-in for it. So we're off to a great start. Things really feel kind of natural and smooth, and I'm grateful for that. You know, we went through some trying times, as did everyone in the world. And, you know, obviously we still have memories of that, but I think that we've been able to sort of push forward. Our kids are happy. Our teachers have the tools and the resources they need. We're all back in school. We're doing what we need to do, and it just feels right. So I'm happy to answer any of the questions from the report or anything that you're curious about.
Sorry.
Anyone?
I just had a comment. So I was going to comment on the presentation that we just had, so that was so great that they could come. I love reading through all the details from the different departments, and as I was reviewing this, it struck me, you kind of just touched on this, the photos look so normal.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, one or two people are wearing a mask, absolutely fine, but the kids are leaning in together, they're in groups, they're looking at the same microscope, and we haven't done that for a long time, or at least not really comfortably. So, so it looks like
You know,
a
into
great
that point, Ms. Potter, our kids are also incredibly respectful and sensitive to anyone who does. And you're not looked upon, because sometimes we'll have faculty members who just had a family member who had COVID, or they're at higher risk, or a student. And that's one of the things that I'm really proud of, is many kids are able to say, okay, I don't need to wear a mask. Others are saying, I do need to still wear one, and it's just, that's the normal flow.
Yeah.
And that's great. You know, I think that that's a place that we wanted to get to, and I agree. I think that, you know, kids are really going about their business in a really respectful, positive manner.
That's great.
Thank you.
Were you talking about the closet where all the costumes were
Yes, you'd
in
be
the
amazed.
back of the high
You
school?
would be amazed.
Oh, the
If you
stock
saw it.
room?
What did you do with all the
So,
stuff?
That was all cleaned up, but you have space down in the pit.
Oh, right.
Where
And that's
we
where it is?
organized- Yeah, so we put shelving in there and moved a lot of it
They're
there.
in the ceiling piles.
I remember that
I'm
room.
just kidding.
Honestly,
They also consolidated, to their credit, too.
Yeah.
They did come in and say, okay, this is something we really haven't used for 8-9 years. Maybe
Yeah.
we can donate it to another theater.
That's good.
And then other things, but,
yeah, because I remember that
I know.
closet. Oh my
I know.
God, I spent some time in there.
I bet.
So, but yeah, you know, talking about creative stuff. At one point, we were talking about like,
Yeah, so we've had initial discussions actually just as of Friday with a firm that does space need analysis.
Yeah.
Right. I was
Yeah.
thinking the
So
same
we,
thing.
you know, it's on our list, and so we started
For both schools.
for the campus.
Yeah.
For this campus.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
So,
great.
Trying to get an idea of sort of what the proposal would encompass, how much it costs. So we've given them some basic preliminary data, and they're going to put together a sample proposal for us. And then there's another firm I might contact as well, but we have started that process.
And what's the parameters of the proposals? Is it tell us how to use our existing space, or is it
Both.
tell us what we
Both.
need?
So you give them all your, so he asked me, you know, is it just looking at space, or do you also need us to come in and say about how your building rehab mechanics? And I'm like, no, we already have that, right? So we're just looking at space. So are we using space effectively? What space do we need based on our number of students? What activities are we trying to do? So they will come and that's sort of what they do, break it apart, give you recommendations, maybe tell you to use spaces like this differently, spaces like, you know, some spaces that we have, maybe they'll have ways that we can more effectively use it. But they'll look at your floor plan, what special programs you have, because I was explaining to him a little bit, our special education programs have grown, which is using space. But I know that, you know, we need to pivot and use some space differently. So they're the independent visual lens for that, but then they have the background in which to give you a recommendation. So The firm that I actually made contact with last week was one that Needham had used. So if you go to Needham's website, there's the one I looked at, there's a 2015 space needs assessment. So if you want to get a feel of like what they entail, that's a good place to go look for a sample.
So their recommendation could conceivably be you need more space.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I was just going to say, looking through the report, there seems to be quite a bit more offerings, or it seems to me, with computer classes. So I would imagine that's kind of impacting, too, some of the space as well.
Yeah, and it will continue. You know, one of the things I've said to the superintendent, I'd like to bring forward robotics. Right now, we have a robotics club, a pretty robust one, but we store that equipment at a family's home. You know, they're fortunate that they have some space that is not designated and you know, some garage space. So yeah, we would probably need space for that. We don't really have a lot of collaboration space, and right now there is no real conference room. There's the guidance conference room, but the main principal's conference room is now occupied by special education programming and staff members for their own office space.
So we do need space.
Yes.
Yes.
As evidenced by the good things that happen. We want to keep having these
Right.
innovative coursework, and
Right.
you know, we need innovative space.
Yeah, and also the nature of learning is evolving.
Yeah.
Right.
And when you talk about collaborative space, you know, we don't necessarily, we need to repurpose areas in classrooms and those kinds of things. So,
Yeah.
well, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. John, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right, on to my report.
Mhm.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Just to provide some updates. So as a district, we celebrated our first Indigenous Peoples Day yesterday, thanks to our engaged fourth graders. And you can see up on the slide deck the sign that was outside of Pine Hill School, recognizing both Yom Kippur and Indigenous Peoples Day. So the new school calendar has several new holidays on it that are recognized: Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Diwali, Lunar New Year, Ramadan, and the two Eid holidays, just to name a few. And so that is going to be inspiration for our students and faculty and families to recognize and perhaps learn a little bit more about the cultures and our classmates and community members who celebrate those holidays. I've been conducting building visits. I'm proud to say at this point in the year, I've been in each building once every week. And so I'm hoping that will continue. Fingers crossed. I was able to attend 3 of the 4 open houses in the district. Unfortunately, Pine Hill and Chickering had theirs on the same night, so I had to pick between the 2. But I want to thank John. David Lawrence isn't here tonight. He's under the weather, but for providing an opportunity for parents to come in person to meet the high school teachers. I got to wear 2 hats that night as a first-time high school parent, and both my husband and I were really excited to meet the teachers, get to know their personalities, and hear all about the relevance and the connections that they're making between their coursework and kids' lives. So thank you for that opportunity. I also voluntarily took the Charting the Course class on September 24th. I thought it'd be interesting now 5-6 years into it to go and revisit all of the protocols and expectations around school committee so that I can more collaboratively work with you and understand our roles and expectations. And we were talking about reviews. I also want to mention that, as you know, 5 years ago, we contracted with Dorsey Yearly and Deb Levine, both retired special educators in the area, to do our initial special education audit to look at our organizational structure, and hence we've now lived with it for 4 years, and we feel like it's time to go back and revisit kind of how it played out to make sure that it is meeting the needs of our students, you know, those with the disabilities, with severe disabilities, those without, to make sure we're maximizing the potential of all of the staff that we have in providing all of the supports that our kids need to succeed. So we'll be starting that work this winter. I'll certainly keep you posted with what we find. I also want to thank the high school renowned Mr. Buck for organizing the Arts Homecoming on Friday. It's become a wonderful tradition in the district. This is his fourth
Yes,
every 2 years biannual
Yep.
event, and had lots of great writers, videographers, musicians, artists come back and share at all 4 schools and spend some time with the kids in the classroom, really inspiring them. And another, I think, nod to the Portrait of a Graduate in that kids finding their passion and being willing to, follow their dreams despite the traditional definition of success, but to define their own path and really make something that's inspirational for others. So that was a great event. So thank you for supporting Darren in that endeavor.
Thank you for supporting it as well.
Entry plan update. So as you know, I'm engaging in my entry plan this year with the hopes of having a new strategic plan come next year. To date, I've had 34 individual meetings with school committee members, leaders, and town officials. Focus groups, I've had 2 with educators so far. I have 4 more on the calendar. And I have 6 parent and caregiver focus groups coming up for elementary and secondary parents and guardians, some in the morning, some in the evening, and some on Zoom, to provide all members of our community an opportunity to reflect on all that we cherish about DS and share our hopes and dreams for where we go in the future. The survey will be coming out later this month. Denny and I are going to combine our questions and try to capture information both about teaching and learning and the district as a whole. And of course, I'm continuing to review documents and analyze data as we go through. Next topic is the equity audit. So as you know, we had NYU present at the September 20th joint meeting. And from that, we now have a lot of information on which we need to act and make bold consequential changes as our community has asked of us. So we will be unpacking the report, processing the findings, kind of developing short-term, middle-term, and long-term plans with the recommendations, starting with the leadership team, and then Denny and I will be going to each of the 4 faculty meetings in November to do that with all of our educators. Professional development is going to be ongoing. Our leadership team has already done a lot of work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that will continue, as it will also for our educators. Denny is planning our November 28th full day of professional development, which we'll speak to, if not today, then in the future. And then from that, we'll get a better sense of what more our educators need to prepare them to engage in this work in the classroom around curriculum, but also address some of the issues and concerns we've heard from the report about students' experiences. Community events, clearly we want to unpack and develop next steps with our community members as well. So on November 2nd, the leadership team will be going into Boston to meet with our Metco families to do a meet and greet, get to know each other, and talk about not only the equity audit, but the district in general, and how we can better support our Boston families. And then on November 3rd at 6:30 in the cafeteria here at the region, we'll be unpacking the equity audit with any community members who'd like to join us. So we're really hopeful that people will come, share their thoughts, share their ideas, share their concerns, so that we can develop next steps as a group. And that will be a facilitated event with someone who specializes in DEI work and has done this work before, to kind of keep us on track in terms of having rich conversation and moving us forward in terms of our goals for the district. And lastly, DS Aid, we've had, I think, 40 new members joined since the audit came out, in addition to the 80 that we already have, and I'm sure some are going to drop off, which is totally fine and respected. But that said, we're going to have our first joint meeting on Zoom this Thursday afternoon, and that'll be an opportunity for this group to unpack the equity audit report and develop next steps, and then from those decide what we want to tackle this year in subcommittees. Because now we have a baseline and we have actual data to support the things that we think or thought we needed to do, what we actually need to do. Lastly, at this meeting every year, we usually share some data with you. So in your packet, you'll notice that we shared the MCAS data for the region, as well as some AP and SAT scores. Thank you to Mr. Smith and his team for providing that, and for Mr. Conklin for condensing it into one nice document. So, we're happy to take questions about that. Mr. Smith will be working with the department chairs at the high school, and Mr. Lawrence with the curriculum leaders at the middle school to look at the MCAS information, the SATs, APs, to see what information can be gleaned in terms of topics where perhaps we need to take a different approach, or students, individuals, or subgroups that might need some additional support to meet the standards. But a reminder that our measures of success as a district are much greater than that. So I provided here 3 columns in this slide. You'll notice the first is really focused on academics. The second is really focused on social emotional well-being, and the third is on kind of enrichment and resources that we have special to Dover-Sherborn, and I think we want to make sure that we continue to keep our definition of success and what we value here as a district greater than that which is easy to quantify through standardized assessments. Last but not least, I just want to mention that it has come up in a few conversations, the Boston Magazine rankings. I don't want to spend much time talking about this, but keeping in mind all of the values and measures of success that we can rely on, I do want to just let people know that, you know, looking at things like MCAS scores, you know, as we keep more students here in the district and try to support their needs here, there will be more students who need to do portfolios as their formalized assessments. AP scores, we're trying to provide the opportunity for more students who want a rigorous challenge to be able to take the course, and that might affect scores. In terms of graduation rate, we have students who are considering gap years, students who are going into the workplace to start, so we don't have as many students going straight to college, which has been thanks to challenge success in our work there. And teacher ratings, as we know, we have high expectations for our teachers, and so that being factored into their rankings, unfortunately, is pretty subjective from district to district, so it does not give necessarily a good measure of where we're at. That said, the information in the Boston Magazine report is also inaccurate. So our scores for SAT reading, SAT math were both lower than the actuals. Our college attendance rate is actually 97%. It was reported as 87%. And then in terms of teacher evaluations, Boston Magazine said we had 85% proficient and 10% exemplary. In reality, we have 66% of our educators rated proficient and 34% exemplary. So it's unfortunate that when they're going to rank us by numbers, the numbers aren't even accurate. So that's a side note.
And we weren't alone in that, right?
No, we
There were
weren't
a few
alone.
Other districts. that
Other
were not
districts.
accurate.
Information was inaccurate as well.
Are they going to revise it?
No.
Can we write a letter to the editor?
You are welcome to, if you'd like to spend the time on that topic.
I mean, I do like accurate information. That's,
Especially if it's ranking.
especially if it's statistical right
ironic.
there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not subjective.
No.
But I guess further to our point.
Yeah.
You know.
So that said, we will have opportunities to look at the Metro West Youth Risk Survey findings in the next couple of months. Denny and Kate McCarthy will be doing a presentation on MTSS and all the layers of support that we have for kids and how we're measuring interventions, who needs them, and who's making progress. So we will have a much greater conversation about the things that we think matter day to day in terms of teaching and learning.
Terrific. Thank
So,
you.
Thank you.
That was excellent.
Just have a real quick question.
Oh, go ahead.
Just so you said we have 40 new members. Is that since our most recent joint school committee meeting?
That is, just prior to that, I had sent out a message to the entire community letting them know that that joint school committee meeting was going to be the NYU presentation. In that was an invite to join DSA. So between the pre-presentation invite and then the post, we have 40 new members.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's great. And lots of students, which is fabulous.
Oh,
That is great.
great.
So great, good news.
Other questions? All right.
All right, thank you. Mr. Conklin.
Hello. So on the teaching and learning front, we'll keep it short and sweet. So I just want to reference the professional development that Mr. Smith was talking about that we had throughout our whole district. So that was one of the things that was very cool is on September 21st, we had the same PD going on at the middle school, the high school, and both of the elementary schools, facilitated by our teacher leaders. Which again, as Mr. Smith said, when you have your colleagues up there presenting and facilitating, it really gets a different teacher buy-in than you just have like me up there presenting to them. What's great about this is that each building came up with a list of best practices, things that they felt like make for really powerful learning experiences. Teachers and staff are going to use those best practices that they brainstormed to brainstorm and come up with their evaluation goals for this year. And then as leaders in the district, we're going to use these best practices that, again, were generated by teachers and staff as we're doing walkthroughs and observations to really try to point out what we're seeing and to calibrate our observations as we're going into classrooms to point out the great things that teachers are doing connected to best practices and ways that we can continue to leverage them to move instruction forward in the district. So you can see here some photos from the high school professional development. You can see some of the work in action. So I asked our teachers and staff to come up with the characteristics that they felt like made for powerful learning. Once they came up with those statements, they voted on them. So this was a miracle that all of the things worked out. And in some cases, the buildings were able to take, 20 to 30 different ideas, put them into a Google form, and have the teachers vote on them and kind of rank them. So in the end, each building came up with around 10 best practices. Then they created full descriptive statements about each of the best practices. And then we had teachers think about what do those best practices look like, feel like, and sound like in the classroom. So we have some very specific look-fors now that we can try to see and feel and hear in the classrooms that we go into. Just to give you a couple of examples of some of the best practices that came from the middle school and the high school. They're up here, I won't read them. You can see that as I was going through actually all of the best practices throughout the district, it was nice to see that they all aligned with each other. There's a lot of repetition, so clearly the staff and educators in our district were very much on the same page. There were a lot of things about the idea of students needing to have authentic experiences, see the relevance immediately in what they're doing. There were a lot of repetitive things around just the learning environment and understanding not only do students need to have a supportive environment where their identities are acknowledged, but that idea of joy also came into these best practices, that we want our students to be enjoying what they're doing, a lot of the posters said things like smiling, enthusiasm, so that was great to see as well. There was a lot of overlap about learners needing to have different options and choice, things that are going to meet their needs, providing various opportunities for all students to feel like they're shining and they're engaging in things that demonstrate their knowledge of what they're doing. So again, these are some of the ones that came out from the middle school and the high school. And in the November early release meetings, teachers and departments are going to go back to this list of best practices, and then they're going to more specifically look at, in the science department, what do these things look like in science practice? In the history department, what do these things look like in a history classroom? So that we're continuing to get to more granular level about what these best practices look like in the content areas, now that we have this kind of wider view of the best practices. We translated a lot of these into the goals that we're asking teachers and staff to make. So as you know, we asked teachers to have a professional practice goal, something that informs or kind of leads more to their professional growth. And we have a student learning goal in which we're asking teachers to implement something that's going to lead to a change or growth in student learning. So these were some of the ones that we sent out to teachers that they could use and they can adopt and personalize and make their own. So the one related to best practices is about utilizing a student-centered, inquiry-based approach. We had one that is focusing on our diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives and thinking more about ways that they can use the findings from the Equity Audit in their classroom. And then another goal around MTSS, multi-tiered systems of supports, and thinking about ways that our teachers can support all variability of learners in their classroom. So right now we have teachers are meeting with their evaluators and they're beginning to set goals, take a self-assessment, and plan for the year ahead. Our ultimate end goal is to think about how we can move our students to this highest level of learning, which is deep engagement. So you can see this little ladder diagram here, and it's kind of the levels of engagement that we want our students to go up to. So at the bottom is resistance, which is just when students don't want to do something. They're getting pushback, they're saying they don't want to complete a task. You don't see a lot of that necessarily in classrooms, but you can see it goes up to periodic compliance, passive compliance, active compliance, engagement, and deep engagement. And a lot of the middle parts here around compliance, when you go into a classroom, might look like you walk in and you see the students are just doing what they're supposed to be doing. Like from an outsider perspective, the students are looking at their worksheets, they're writing. You can see that they're doing what they're being asked to do. When you move to more active compliance, then you might have a lot less teacher, direction, that students can do more themselves. Maybe students in active compliance are in groups and they're answering questions together. You can hear them talking about the questions. Moving up to engagement, maybe that's when teachers are giving more open-ended questions to small groups of students to discuss. So kind of how or why questions that don't necessarily have a right or wrong answer, that you're asking students to confer with each other, to agree and disagree with each other. And then the highest part of this letter, the deep engagement part, would be if you didn't give the students questions at all. If you ask them, come up with your own inquiry question, come up with your own supporting questions, and then think about the places where you can explore those questions in more depth. Think about the ways in which you want to take what you find and how you want to present it, whether that's through a podcast, whether that's through a poster, through creating a website. So that's kind of that highest level of deep engagement that we're looking for. So that's another thing that we'll be working on as a leadership team, is thinking about what these various levels look like when we're walking into classrooms. And this is also kind of in line with the Bloom's taxonomy, which we're familiar with, going from just simple recall all the way up to thinking about application, synthesis, evaluation, and those more sophisticated higher order thinking skills. So that is our update. I've been continuing with my entry plan, going to schools and buildings. Last week I got in to see all of the history classrooms at the high school, which, being a former history teacher, was fantastic to be in. And I did a sweep of all the science classrooms of middle school last week as well. So just continuing to get to know who the kids are, get to know what teaching is going on. That is a little update.
Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
I like this graphic. And I was kind of chuckling that at home this morning getting out the door, I felt like I had periodic compliance. Maybe passive.
Yeah.
I had flat-out resistance this morning getting out the door with my 4-year-old, so that's better.
Oh, God, that's great.
If I could just make one comment too about the best practices that Denny shared. Again, each school has roughly 10, and the 4 schools is significant overlap, and I think that speaks to the fact that the work we've been doing with Challenge Success for several years, talking about innovation and 21st century learning, and now DEI and how to, have an equitable and culturally inclusive curriculum, is really taking kind of hold and taking root, and you're starting to see the overlap, the Venn diagram between the 3, and they're showing up in practice in terms of what our goals are. So we don't need to use the acronyms or the edgy jargon anymore. We can just say, this is what good teaching and learning looks like, and let's get to it.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Thank you.
All right. So now we move on to Dawn.
Yes.
Yeah, so the work report is short and sweet, since we just met recently, and I just want to highlight the $1 million is not, it's like 3 health insurance payments that were processed all at once, so just in case anyone had a question why we're spending $1 million. That is how we booked healthcare for the summer. It's always fun to put together the first set of financials. It's always not a surprise, but to see like how the numbers work out. So I gave you some brief information of what we know to date. Most of the salaries have been encumbered, so you're looking at a sort of pretty good salary snapshot, except for those couple of things that I mentioned are either expense as incurred, or we have not obviously done the contracts for the winter and spring coaches, which is why you'll see a chunk hanging out there. On the revenue side, I will just mention that there is basically in line with where we thought we were going to be. For most of these things, we don't start making any kind of projections for a lot of the activity fees until we get sort of like in December, January, and see where we are. Chapter 71, I will say the number that is showing on our cherry sheet is about 73% reimbursement. However, the state budget did pass with amounts that would fund about 85%. Again, they don't know all the expenses ahead. We just filed our end of the year report, so that's where that always doesn't shake out with exactly where it's going to be. So my guess is we'll be somewhere between 73 and 85%. So we may see an additional surplus variance for Chapter 71. But just know that that then is what we probably would take and use as E&D against your fiscal year 24 budget. So that, other than that, there's not much to say on the revenue side. On the expenditure side, I just ran through the salaries for you. Some of the variances, you'll see guidance sort of has a double-digit variance. That really is based on some openings and our staffing who we hired slightly different than what we budgeted for. I think with everything that we're focusing on the SEL, we're not looking to shortchange ourselves if we can find someone who's very experienced. And that's one of those cases where we took, the best person for the job. versus looking at what we had budgeted. So we will make up for that someplace else, but we, that's not, we've been making more decisions about that to make sure we get the right person in the position versus trying to stick to the budget, because we know we have some flexibility. On the expenditure side, this is where we'll start doing a little more work. I know healthcare is always one of those arenas that we're looking to see how we sort of shake out. September is a big month where any new employees are coming on board, so we're waiting for all that to settle. So in your November meeting, I should have a more a clearer projection of where we are based on budget. So we will figure that out. And then the other thing that we will sort of start encumbering are utilities. Utilities, I will say, are getting a little scary. I actually have had a couple of meetings lately because we're looking to extend our electric supply contract. And as you know, what's going on in the market. Luckily, where we are secured right now with our contract is about half the price of what the market is right now. So there are huge benefits to getting into these long-term contracts. And so now I think they're looking at getting users of electricity who procure this way into long-term contracts, even going out while we're at this cusp of who knows what's going to happen. And so we're actively looking at extending our contract that ends in December 23 out to probably December 26. So if we make that decision, I will let you guys know, but I will say preliminarily it looks like our supply rate will go up about 44%. That's what the market's looking like right now compared to where we are. So it is a little, not to scare you, financially that's about a $100,000 increase in our electricity bill, because remember you have supply and delivery for your electricity, so it's really just the supply that's going a little crazy right now. But it is a volatile market, as we hear about in the news every day. So we are looking into that and seeing what we can do to just protect ourselves a little bit. But luckily, we won't have to hit that until fiscal year 25 budget, I think. So keep our fingers crossed on that. I also then gave you a synopsis of some of our capital projects, and I thought I'd had some pictures this time. So I think it's pretty cool to see these are from the drone from one of our contractors, to see sort of the before and the after. And so just to refresh your memory how this sort of roof restoration was taking place is it's actually a water-based, well, not a water-based, it's a water repellent system that they put down. So they put down an initial layer of this, what do you want to call it, substance. Then they put down this mesh fabric over the whole thing, and they put another coat on it, and then they put a finishing coat more for the cosmetic side. So you can see how it takes from our ugly black asphalt with all broken seams, we're up to a solid, looks like an ice skating rink up there. And so we have high hopes that this is going to solve any water leaks that we've had, especially this building. We were having significant water damage from some of the seams that have come up, and they're in the stages right now of just going through their punch list. So we are at the substantially complete situation. There are a few little, I mentioned there's one structural defect on Lenquist that we had engineers in on Friday to sort of give us an estimate. They think it's probably something that might have happened when the building was rehabbed and some of the very large HVAC equipment was moved up, but it might have fallen because the way there's a sinking part in the roof, so they might have damaged some of the structural beams underneath, and so it became apparent when they were up there looking on the roof. So if you have any students in the band room, some of the tiles have been gone because that's actually where the defect is, and they had to look up and down. So we had the tiles out for a little bit, but hopefully that will be a repair bill that I can absorb in the maintenance reserve, but I will keep you abreast of that. But other than that, it was a summer, very busy summer for them. You know, the weather sometimes didn't cooperate, but I think they did a pretty good job. And if you ever want to go up, I've actually been up on most of them to see it in action. It's actually pretty cool. So thought you'd like to see that. And then I just gave you a closer look of the middle school so you can actually see the, and it's interesting now with the sort of the little slopes there. I can see them from my office, and it's weird to see that they're white now. And then just a synopsis on the other projects, obviously, the high school floors. We have completed doing all of the classrooms in the English and Social Studies wing. And we are pretty close to finishing the access system at Lenquist. I think they have to get us a new control board to do some programming so it's consistent with our current system. But we'll set the schedule and get that up and running. And the one project that is sort of on hold is the high school boiler replacements. And we're working with the town sustainability groups to make sure that we're keeping all of our options open. Obviously, getting rid of fossil fuels and thinking if there's another way that we can sort of go forward with that project. We do have some time to sort of further explore because they're pretty good. We did some little repairs, so we're not in an emergency need to replace these, so we're trying to be prudent with that. And so I continue to meet with mainly Sherborn as they're moving forward with the sustainability to see where we can go with that. We just filed our end of the year report for 22. The auditors are starting tomorrow, and E&D was submitted, and I don't know, last year we didn't find out till February, but as soon as we find out when E&D is certified, we'll let the committee know. And tomorrow we're kicking off the fiscal year 24 budget process. So
When I read that, I was like,
I know.
Oh,
John's
God.
living in 3 years.
Life is fun. I know when I see fiscal year 22 wrap up, fiscal year 24 budget, but we did sort of open up the budget today with the consultant, set everything up, and are going to be passing it out to the buildings to start working on, and then roll out the 2 locals in November, and you guys will get your first version in December. So I think well, let me stop there before I go to the last thing. Any questions on any of that?
Just a quick comment, I guess. I was glad to see that we're considering making the athletic trainer a full-time.
Oh, yes, that's such a big thing. Glad you reminded me. So we really had a hard time last year. So we had our contracted service provider that usually, we had a long-serving trainer, right? But she didn't really work for us. We had her through an agency. When she left the agency, they had a hard time filling her replacement. So we had someone initially, and then we were sort of left to filling it basically from November until the end of the year with probably about 10 different people. And so it was a lot of scheduling issues for Emily and Susan, and it was a little piecemeal. So we put out all the feelers again. Emily worked really hard to try to see if there was any way that there was any firms that we could contract with. We asked around to the other TBLs, what do you do? And at the end of the day, if we wanted to have good, safe, secure, consistent service, we had to post for an interim athletic trainer. So to make the budget sort of whole, we put in the budget what was charging her salary, the budget that we had for the contracted service provider, and then the additional that we had to pay for market to acquire someone we're charging this year to the athletic revolving fund. We'll put the whole salary in the budget going forward.
Right.
But in this year in which you hadn't approved the position, we used the money that we had, and then we found another source of funding for the difference. And so far, I think it's working out great. So she's doing a great job. I think she's working well with the team. And I think it's just much smoother operations from the athletic department in general. So it's nice to have someone. I mean, I can't imagine the scheduling. Well, then then we had to pay them all. So it was a nightmare all the way around. Not that we didn't have high quality people doing it.
Right.
But it was just a lot to manage.
Well, I think too, somebody who is consistent and gets to know the student athletes and how's your injury? How are you doing? Or you're all, that's so important. Yeah.
Yeah, level of trust and
absolutely.
familiarity
And comfort.
that causes, that enables kids to go seek the
And
help
that
they
you
need.
sort of control their whole schedule, whereas with the outside agency, there were set hours because then that person obviously did other things, other places. So there's much more flexibility with the schedule. So she'll be able to travel to away football games and take care of some of that stuff that we didn't necessarily have with the agency trainer. So I think it's all going to be for the best. And sometimes, it's the environment sort of forced our hand on it a little bit.
Yep.
But I think that Emily had hoped we'd get to there anyway. It just, with COVID, sort of came at a standstill. We continue to work with the same agency. And then I think with the person departing the agency is sort of what led us to realize that we had actually been in a pretty good sweet spot, that we actually had a person who was here all those times and weren't struggling like some of the other TVL leagues were looking for somebody. So thank you, Emma. That was my main part. Got so excited about everything else I forgot that. So you'll see that reflected in the budget. It will be up in salaries though, so once all the coaches are encumbered, you're going to see negative there, but we should hopefully, if everything works out right, we'll have savings in the operating side. That sort of nets it out, but because she's technically an employee, we're charging her where she should be, and the expense is just in the operating side.
Is it the same person or we have a new person?
The new person. Yeah. Okay, so then there was some requests to sort of just do a little bit of sort of budget 101 as we go into the new budget year, just to sort of educate some of the new people, refresh those people who've been around. So rather than having, say, a workshop where we did it, I thought I could just do it in pieces for the school committees as we meet. And so for you guys, because you do revenues and expenditures, the two locals just really look at expenditures, I thought we could just sort of briefly give you an overview of the revenues and how those are derived, and obviously that's why I included the assessment calculation in your packet. But if you look at your revenue statement that's in your packet, obviously the majority of our budget, we rely on the assessments from the town. The contributors that we have that are non-town assessments are obviously the state money that we get from Chapter 70 and Chapter 71. A little bit from Chapter 71, just if you look at I'm just going to walk through.
I'm on it.
Chapter 71 knows, that it's reimbursement based on your actual transportation costs from the previous year. So there is a delayed reimbursement, and then the state technically is mandated to reimburse us 100%, but as we know, there's a lot of state mandates that aren't fully funded. And so over the years, at least that I've been in this position, we've been reimbursed anywhere from like 65 all the way up to the high 90s during the COVID, because we were going to school. A lot of schools weren't. There was a lot of money to be given, so we got almost 100%. Like I said, this year the approved budget has a target rate of 85%, but again, that is never, just like circuit breaker, they really don't know what that number could be when it's not fully funded, because they don't really know what their pot of expenses are when they build their budget. So that's why it can always sort of deviate a little bit. So Chapter 70, we don't get a whole lot of Chapter 70 money. If you look at other school districts, say in Boston or Lowell, you'll see that their Chapter 70 number is much greater. It's a much larger percentage of their operating budget than for us. So the state sets a foundation budget for your school based on your students, their, say, special ed, ELL, their makeup, low income. So they come up with a foundation amount that you're required to spend on a student. Then they look at your town's wealth, property value, whole very convoluted analysis. And they say you are responsible for funding up to 82.5% of that foundation budget if you can afford it. Well, obviously, we can afford it. So our Chapter 70 is that 17.5% difference on the foundation, and that's your net school spending. But we spend way more than that. So that's why you see such a small, when you look at Chapter 70 compared to our total operating budget, we spend double, basically, the foundation. So that's a little bit of how that number is derived, and then you're also assessed for any students that you have do school choice. We don't accept school choice, but we can send students for school choice, and that's built into your Chapter 70. And then we have some fees That sort of helps supplement our budget. Obviously, athletic fees, the budget right now is about 850 students at our $335. That's assuming about 283 average per season. Some seasons are a little bit larger. Back before COVID, we were meeting that. So it'll be interesting to see if we get back up to that level. We've been under, 2021 and 22, we've been under, but we were over at 19. So that's why we've held off doing some of those. Parking fees is $300 for the whole year, prorated for drivers who come on during the year. Your high school activity fee is $75 per student. Middle school activity is $45 per student. We have not been hitting those, obviously, in the last couple of years either. So I think this is the year that we'll start looking at that a little closer and seeing if we need to reduce it. Miscellaneous revenue are just some random things that fall our way, reimbursements from previous years, our lost book, if we get any lost book revenue. So that can come and go. And then bank interest, I'm happy to say we're not getting a lot of bank interest last year, but our treasurer has moved some of our funds to a state-based fund and a trust, and we've already earned for the first quarter $5,000. So we will be able to see some greater bank interest revenues this year compared to what we did last year. So he is moving our money around, which is great. The non-cash activity, again, is not a budget line item, but where at the end of the year, any encumbrances that we made for the previous year that don't get spent show up sort of as a non-cash revenue because it's expenses that we thought we were going to have that we don't. And then obviously our E&D utilization. So that, just keep in mind, is always tied to an identified one-time situation. You don't want to use E&D that doesn't have like a reason why you're using it at one time or it's tied to something. So the last couple of years, we've been using E&D based on our revenue positive variances. So had we known that we were going to get more Chapter 71 revenue, that our assessments for the town would have been less that year. So we're giving them the credit in the next year. Mm-hmm. Same with Chapter 70, interest revenue, any of those. We're giving the towns credit for had we known your assessment would have been less, so we're going to give you credit for that in the next year. So you don't want to say, oh, we've got $1.5 million in E&D and we need to balance the budget, please put $500 from E&D. You don't really want to do that because then you can't make that up the next year. Mm-hmm. Right? You're at a budget shortfall right there. So we usually try to tie it to something that we know is not going to hurt the budget the next year. So if you look at the assessment calculation, just to refresh your memory, so obviously we build our budget and then we have to back into how we're going to fund it. And so the state comes up with your foundation, then that derives the minimum local contribution for the towns. Mm-hmm. So that again is taking the 82.5% of the foundation rate and saying that's what the two towns, that's assuming that they've determined that you're at the 82.5%. So sometimes you're not, but then they come up with that for the minimum local contribution. So that's something that has nothing to do with how many students necessarily are there, but it's well, it does a little bit because it's the foundation, but that is then the basis of what starts the calculation. So you put that in there, and then you take your total budget after you back out what the town doesn't have to fund. So your Chapter 70, your E&D, your other revenues, and then that's what you have to spread. Mm-hmm. And this convoluted spreadsheet sort of shows you that way. So it sort of shows you how it works. There is a assessment percentage or calculation for your operating, which is strictly enrollment. So it's November 1st. So this year's enrollment is what's going to set your assessment percentages for next year. So the November 1st enrollment this year sets your assessment percentage for operating for fiscal year 24. And then the debt is sort of twofold. It's both current enrollment, but it also picks up census. So it's also 25% of that calculation is based on kids who are would be if they went to school here, grades 5 through 11. So that picks up all your private schools. There, because it makes sense. They could come here, and so they're investing in the capital. So it's split up current students, but then also you pick up 25% where you take all students in the towns. And then so those percentages are used to spread the operating as well as the debt, the capital, and you'll see that off at the final is where we spread the debt. So I think that's sort of how it all sort of plays out. A lot of numbers, but at the end of the day, it's some of it set by the state based on net school spending, the foundation, what you're required to contribute, and then the other half is you guys determining what your total budget's going to be, and the rest of that gets spread back to the two towns.
Thank you.
Make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
There's a quiz next
Yeah.
month.
I was just going to say, questions? No? Okay,
So
good.
on the expenditure side, if you just want to tell me a little bit about some of the key areas that you'd like to get some more insight into how we develop the budget, that I can sort of, do the same little sort of mini lesson next time in November. I know healthcare is usually one that we like to look at. Obviously, we're going into negotiations with all bargaining units, so we budget a little bit differently in those years than we do in a year that we have contracts that we know are going to be. But some of the key budget drivers, if you want to just email Judy and Maggie,
That's
let me
great.
know, then I can sort of highlight those specifically.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's really helpful. What's that? And then are you doing, you have the October preliminary enrollment figure, so you want to talk about that, or?
Well, I will say I didn't see it until I saw it in the packet, but I will note that I believe the 12th grade is not correct.
I think they're inverted.
I'm not sure they're inverted either, looking at the 11th grade from last year.
Yeah.
So I want to check those numbers. We just
Yeah, it
usually
doesn't look
share
right.
those now because they are preliminary,
Yeah.
but we'll scrub them more. And then remember, your assessments are all based on November 1st. And so this is just to give a feel of where we are when school opens. But I do think that I'm not thinking it's reversed either. I don't
It
think
can't-
we had,
yeah.
unless we had a lot more students. It was only 150 11th graders.
Ah.
So something went awry there. But we will look into that, and when you get your November enrollments, those will be good, and that will be what will start the assessment process for the budget. So.
Excellent.
Great.
Thank you, John. I always feel so comfortable listening to you. I always, it's like, I trust you so much, you know.
Thank you.
I get panicked thinking maybe I should have locked in something with utilities after,
Yeah.
Well, I know, right? Seriously.
Oh,
Yeah, it's not looking good.
no. So, all right, so the next item is the, what's it called on here?
MASC.
Yeah, the MASC policy audit review, the review of the policy. So that's actually something, I am the chair of the policy subcommittee. And it's been, hopefully you guys took a look at the little write-up that Sarah did, which is beautifully written. Basically, our policies haven't been reviewed as a whole in 10 years. They've been reviewed piecemeal. And I wanted to stop and thank Lynn, because Lynn, for the last couple of years, has done a spectacular job writing and rewriting and keeping on top of all of the policies. And, incredible. But we decided that it's probably time, since they haven't been overhauled as to do that. Okay, that it's time. Statutes have changed, laws have changed, how we operate. The school district, we've had a lot of changes in the last 10 years, and so it's probably a good idea to do a global review. And so MASC is the most knowledgeable organization. They put out policy updates all the time saying, look at this policy, this is what we think should change. And they have a service where Dorothy Presser will come and help you go through and assess your policies, review them, and update them, and help you decide what needs to be changed and how you want to change it. And it's actually a pretty, inexpensive, as these things would go, process. Some districts take 3 years to do them. She said that it should take us 18 to 24 months. It may take less than that. But the charge for it is $10,500, and that's split 60% to the region and 20 to each of the other districts. I think it's well worth the money. And we can pay that out over 3 years. So I think, and we've spoken to Dawn, and it's we can do this. We have the funds to do it. So, questions about this? No?
I don't have any questions. I can just, echo what you said about the need for this change. I think a decade is a long enough time to be, dealing on a reactive basis to our policies, that it's time to have a thorough overview. Policy work is complicated and requires a consistent, constant professional eye on these things. And while, I don't consider myself one of those, I did for a living work on policy, and, that's great for me, but, it's something that as a district, we need something a lot more comprehensive. And I think that this, wholesale review by MASC is going to be great and put us in a great position moving forward to sort of, for another decade, deal reactively.
And it will also, as part of it, I know that we're doing some reviews of the handbooks, and so it will. Those will be brought in to the handbooks as well, and so we'll be in much better shape, because we'll be able to feel, and we'll also update everything in terms of DEI and those kinds of language changes that we've been making in a piecemeal way. I'm actually in a geeky sort of way excited about this, So, all right. So should we then, I guess I need a motion to, I didn't even think about this ahead of time. A motion to approve hiring MASC at a rate of $10,500 to assist us in revising our policies to be split among the 3 districts, 60, 20, 20.
So moved.
Thank you, Lynn. Can someone second? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, the motion passes unanimously. Okay.
Well done.
That's all set. So now we just have the consent agenda, and that we have to approve the minutes of the September 13th meeting, and then there are communications here. which are,
So the minutes from the Sherborn and
Yeah.
Dover.
I'm just looking at the Tech Capital Reserve Fund and the academic testing report. Anything that we need to say about those, or just they're there and you can read them?
Just that at the last Board of Directors meeting for the Tech Collaborative, they requested that all member districts consider allowing them to increase their capital reserve fund, and there was a memo in there. They're hoping to increase it from $350,000 to $750,000. And there is no vote necessary unless you want to oppose their interest in doing that.
Okay.
And then the academic testing report is there for your purview and review.
Okay. So I've been sitting through these meetings for how many years, and I assume that the consent agenda, we have to move to approve the consent agenda? Would someone?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Okay. Items for the November 15th meeting. If you have any additional items, you might tell Maggie. And I think unless you have anything else, Superintendent McCoy.
Nope, just that in November, we'll look at the ACED recommendations if we've reviewed them by then. If not, we'll move them to December, and then any budget guidance that you have for us moving forward.
Okay, good. All right. So I think we can move to adjourn. Do we vote? Do I have to move? Can I move? Can someone make the motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Lynn.
Adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor of adjourning? Thank you. Thank you for bearing with me on that one.
Yes,
Okay.
well done.
All right.